I'm thrilled to share with you this day a message about compassion is love in action. My definition of compassion is just that, love in action. And I want to invite you for a couple of moments to think about a time when you experienced love in action. Perhaps it was at the time of a death of a loved one and someone came to your house and brought you a delicious meal. Or maybe it was after you experienced a hospitalization and you came home and found your house cleaned by unexpected individuals. Or maybe it was a time when you felt lonely or isolated and someone came and was simply present to you. They didn't offer advice and they certainly were not judgmental. Think about that time in your life when you experienced compassion, love in action. Take a moment now to savor that memory. You see, compassion comes in a variety of forms. The reality is, when we experience compassion, we may not recall the exact action that another person took, but we will rarely, if ever, forget how it made us feel. Because when we experience compassion, it is like being enveloped in a warm hug. Friends, it's my contention that compassion can literally change the world. Years ago, anthropologist Margaret Mead was asked by a student what she considered to be the first sign of a civilized culture. The student expected Mead to talk about fish hooks or clay pots or even a grinding stone. But no, Mead said that the first sign of a civilization in an ancient culture was a femur, a thigh bone that had been broken and healed. You see, Mead explained that in the animal kingdom, if you break your leg, you literally die. You cannot run from danger, getting into the river for a drink, or hunt even for food. You are meat for prowling beasts. No animal survives a broken leg long enough for the bone to heal. So you see, Mead's contention was that a broken femur that had healed was evidence that someone had taken the time to stay with that individual, to bind up their wound when they had fell, and to carry that person to safety and to tend to the person during their recovery. Helping someone else through difficulty is where civilization starts, Mead said. This story was recounted for us by Ira Byock. In today's session, I will share the difference with you between compassion and empathy. We'll look at three basic components that equate compassion, and then I will touch briefly on the aspect of compassion fatigue. The words compassion and empathy are often used interchangeably. Both compassion and empathy arise from a similar desire to understand what another person is experiencing. Empathy and compassion are valuable traits to possess, yet they are slightly different from one another. You see, it's valuable for us to understand the difference between the two. So you ask, what's the difference? What is the definition of compassion and how is it distinct from empathy? Well, according to Psychology Today, and I quote, compassion is an empathetic understanding of a person's feelings, accompanied by an altruism or a desire to act on the person's behalf, end quote. Dr. Yesenia Jaimes writes, and I quote, compassion is when you relate to someone's situation and you want to help them. You see someone in trouble and you feel like pitching in, end quote. Compassion always includes an action. It is an active word. It is our attempt to alleviate another person's suffering. You see, compassion requires of an individual that we become engaged in a situation. A person takes an active stance, but the action taken is one that is both thoughtful and carefully considered. Fred Kaufman said this: "Wisdom without compassion is ruthless, and compassion without wisdom is folly." Empathy, on the other hand, is defined as our feeling of awareness towards other people's emotions and an attempt to understand how they feel. Barbara Kingsolver defines it this way: empathy as the capacity to understand that every war is both won and lost, and that someone else's pain is as meaningful as your own, end quote. You see, an empathetic person understands that it hurts to be made fun of, to be rejected, and or to be ignored. Empathy means that I am able to see what you and I hold in common. We are fellow companions on a life journey. You see, empathy doesn't require that I engage with the other person. I can actually be at a physical distance from a person who is grieving and attempt to understand how he or she feels. I sense that this is a difficult or a painful experience. I have an awareness of the situation, but I may not involve myself in any meaningful way into the situation. I don't seek to offer anything that would lessen a person's pain. Here's an example. Let's think about it this way. You're walking into the grocery store one afternoon, and you notice someone carrying out a bag of groceries. Unfortunately, you see the bag break and all of the groceries fall to the ground. Now, the empathetic person looks at that individual and thinks, "Oh my, that's such a frustrating experience. I feel bad for them." But they actually take no action. They have a feeling, they feel for the person, but they do nothing about it. On the other hand, the person who is compassionate and displays love in action immediately takes an active stance. They may say, "Can I help you pick up your groceries?" Or they may say, "Let me run and get you another bag." They do something to actually deter the person's painful experience. The compassionate person is instinctive to think, what can I do to lessen this person's painful experience? Now, neither the empathetic person nor the compassionate person did something so monumental that it probably transformed their day. But the experience of the one who had the broken bag is monumentally different because of each person. They might not even know that the empathetic person exists because they had no meaningful engagement with that person. Whereas the compassionate person bent down and aided them in their time of suffering. While this is a very simplistic example, it does show us the innate difference between empathy and compassion. So, I'm not in any way dismissing the characteristic of empathy. It has its place, and it is helpful for us to cultivate empathy. Yet compassion always leads to a deeper engagement with others. How does a person exhibit compassion? Well, I'm going to touch on 3 basic elements of compassion with you. And I must say, in no way is this exhaustive. It is merely a sample of things that are consistently a part of one who displays compassion. Moreover, exhibiting compassion may or may not be somebody's natural response. It's like any other skill. It needs to be developed and it needs to be practiced in order for us to be more and more compassionate. Now, I suspect that most of you who are viewing this are indeed compassionate individuals. That's why you are wanting to be a supportive friend. But nevertheless, it's important for us to think about how do we show up in a compassionate manner. First and foremost, if we are going to extend compassion, we need to show up for those who are hurting. To extend genuine compassion, we must be able and willing to get into the mess and the muck of life. I am not talking about attending to someone's birthday party or a special celebration. No, I am talking about showing up when the wheels of life have fallen off, when many people might be pulling back and be resistant to engage in a situation. Now, we must be willing to observe and recognize that there is a need that needs to be met. Do you know someone today who is experiencing a challenging situation that he or she is unable to change by him or herself? Compassion says, I care enough about you that I'm going to show up for you. All too often, when people are suffering, it's easy to just say, I don't know what to do. I'm afraid I'm going to do the wrong thing. And so we do absolutely nothing. Compassion says we're willing to get in there. Now for me, there's a little story that shares this beautifully. It was written by A.A. Milne in the famous book, Winnie the Pooh. Pooh begins saying, today is a difficult day. There was a pause. When Piglet responds, do you want to talk about it? No, Pooh says after a bit. No, I don't think I do. That's okay, said Piglet. And he came and he sat down next to his friend. Pooh looked at Piglet and said, what are you doing? Nothing really, said Piglet. Only I know what difficult days are like. Quite often, don't feel like talking about those difficult days myself. But goodness, Piglet says, difficult days are so much easier when you know you've got someone there for you. And I'll always be here for you, Pooh. And as Pooh sat there, working in his head through the difficult day, while the solid, reliable Piglet sat next to him quietly, swinging his little legs, he thought that his best friend had never been more right. Friends, who do you know who is hurting today? Who do you know who has experienced the wheels of life falling off and they just need someone to be present? Who do you know who needs a helping hand? In other words, I want to encourage you to go where the hurt is. A word of caution. It's critical that we never assume that we know exactly what another person needs. We must be willing to do the next step, which we've devoted a whole entire session to, which is listening. The second key ingredient of compassion is listening. My motto is to love is to listen. To listen means we hear more than just the simple words that are spoken. No, we hear the depth of a person's heart. We read their body language. We listen to the tone of the words that they speak. And we often have to squelch our desire to speak and honor what is being shared. We must be willing to be fully present to another person and to listen intently to what their heart needs to have heard. As I said, most individuals think that they are pretty good listeners, when in reality, most of us are good talkers. We tend to think that if we just keep a conversation going, that is its purpose. Well, friends, let me tell you that if we are really going to be compassionate to another individual, the key is that we're willing to allow for silence and space so that a person's heart might be fully listened to. And so I hope that you, as a compassionate person, will do so. When we are with people who are hurting, we may want to just alleviate their pain so much that we immediately go into that advice mode. We want to fix it. We want to make things better. But so often, we don't honor that person when we do so. Sometimes we need to just be willing to allow them to genuinely be heard. They don't need us to fix it. We need to validate the person's pain and strategize alongside of him or her as to what best can be done. Many times, the most helpful thing we can do, the most compassionate act we can do, is to ask what that person needs. And this leads to our third element of compassion, which is investment. Compassion requires us to engage rather than to simply observe. Let me be clear. To extend compassion is to be willing to exercise in a way that is costly, and it may take an emotional toll on you. If you want to genuinely help another human being, you must be willing to be all in. You must be willing to go a mile when you thought, I only need to go a block. You must do the heavy lifting, and it can take a lot of energy to extend compassion. There are times when extending compassion may seem like too high of an investment. It's normal for a compassionate person to occasionally have mixed feelings about the situation that they're in. Don't dismiss your feelings. Explore what's at the root of them. Ask yourself, what's making me reluctant to exhibit compassion? Why am I hesitant to extend love to this person? It could be as simple as you're having a bad day. Or maybe you're exhausted because you've been carrying a heavy load within your own personal life or at work. Or it may be a sign that a boundary has been crossed. And we're going to devote an entire session to looking at how we keep and maintain boundaries within our supportive friends' relationships. Perhaps the person who needs compassion is also not doing his or her part. Maybe it feels like you're doing all the heavy lifting and the simple little things that you're asking this individual to do, they don't seem to be doing. But then I wonder, is there really agreement at all? Was it your idea that he or she do such and they really never bought into it? You see, situations bring up lots of different things. It could be that what you're engaged in reminds you of a previous time when you helped someone and that situation didn't work out as you had hoped. While we always want to maintain a spirit of curiosity and freedom from judgment, we need to be open and honest with our feelings about a particular situation. It's okay to have mixed feelings. Also, we can display compassion without always feeling that warm, fuzzy feeling. I'm not saying fake it till you make it, but I'm saying recognize that when we help other people, when we're extending compassion, it's tough. Let me share another scenario with you. John was always known as an extremely compassionate person. He was always willing to go above and beyond to help another individual. And one of those individuals was Martha. Martha was a woman who was dealing with housing insecurity. And after many, many months of supporting Martha, John was able to finally help Martha get her own place. Martha was ecstatic about finally having somewhere to call home. Unfortunately, part of having a home meant that Martha was having guests upon guests, not only coming to her home, but spending the night. After several warnings from her landlord, Martha was informed that she was going to be evicted. The day came when she had to call John and share the news with him. When John heard the news that Martha was going to be evicted because she hadn't followed the rules, his heart sank. But fortunately, John remained calm and quiet. He listened. He listened to what Martha was saying. And then, instead of casting judgment, instead of allowing his anger and frustration to go out, John was able to coach Martha through the situation. They came up with a plan where Martha would approach her landlord and explain that she was really apologetic for her behavior. And as such, she was now willing to commit to following the rules. Fortunately, Martha's landlord was willing to give her one more chance. And as a result, Martha was willing to and able to stay in her new home. You see, thankfully, John was willing to be present enough, even though he had deep emotions about what Martha was sharing with him. As compassionate individuals, it doesn't mean that at times we're not disappointed, discouraged, or even distraught. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote this, and I quote, "We must learn to regard people less in light of what they do or omit to do, and more in light of what they suffer." Now, friends, this leads us to the topic of compassion fatigue. As compassionate individuals, it is critical that we also have individuals with whom we can share appropriately our joys and frustrations. I would highly encourage each and every one of you to have someone that you can speak honestly about your feelings. Now, in doing so, we are not ever to break confidentiality, but we can share honestly about our feelings. For example, you can share about how a situation made you feel and what is going on inside of you without breaking confidentiality. You might say something like this: "I struggle when I cannot relate to the choices that the person I'm trying to support is making. I feel unworthy at times to even hear that person's story." Now, you are not sharing any specific details about the person whom you are companioning. You are simply talking about how it makes you feel, and that is appropriate to do. I would also encourage you that if you get to a point where you are thinking, "I don't want to do this anymore. I am tired of helping people. I don't want to hear one more story about how they are unable to do something." I cannot encourage you enough that if you get to that point, to seek professional help. Yes, we need friends who we can share the journey with, but sometimes we need another professional who can help us to unpack what is going on inside of us. This is normal, and this is an appropriate use for us to seek out others who can help us in the journey. Compassion fatigue is a serious condition. Psychologist Heidi Alspack says this: "Individuals with big hearts are at risk of developing compassion fatigue." Ironically, she explains that caregivers can become so over-empathetic that they find themselves growing numb to others' suffering. One of the best ways, she says, to avoid compassion fatigue is to practice self-compassion. Self-compassion simply means to extend compassion to oneself as you would a friend. Now, I know that unfortunately, when many of us hear self-compassion, we equate it with selfishness, and it is not. They are miles apart, my friends. Self-compassion means that you ask yourself this: if a friend came to you and said, I'm just so exhausted from helping others. How would you speak to your friend? How would you want them to treat themselves? Would you want them to rest? Would you want them to take care of themselves, body, mind, and spirit? Of course you would. And in the same way, you need to attend to your own spirit. Compassionate individuals tend to think that they shouldn't need assistance. No, I'm the one here to help everyone else. No, that isn't true. We all need to attend to ourselves. I always say to people, if your well is empty, you're going to have nothing to give to anyone else. So you need to make sure you're taking care of yourself. Compassionate individuals are givers, but they need to take time for emotional, physical, social, and spiritual needs. Compassion is a wonderful gift that we can extend to others. And as such, I appreciate this quote from John Conley. The nature of humanity, its essence, is to feel another's pain as one's own and to act to take that pain away. There's nobility in compassion, a beauty in empathy, and a grace in forgiveness. I want to close today, this lesson, with the words of a song that may not be familiar to you, but the words are nevertheless very powerful. It's called Reach Out and Touch. Reach out and touch a soul that is hungry. Reach out and touch a spirit in despair. Reach out and touch a life that is torn and dirty. A man who is lonely, if you care. Reach out and touch that neighbor who hates you. Reach out and touch a stranger who meets you. Reach out and touch the brother or sister who needs you. Reach out and let the smile of God touch through you. Reach out and touch a friend who is weary. Reach out and touch a seeker unaware. Reach out and touch, though touching means losing a part of our own self, if you dare. Reach out and give your love to the loveless. Reach out and make a home for those who are experiencing homelessness. Reach out and shed God's light in the darkness. Reach out and let God's smile touch through you. Friends, it is my hope that you will display compassion, love in action to everyone you meet.